All right. Thanks everybody for coming. We're going to start today as usual with our territorial acknowledgement. So I'm located here in Montreal, and so we would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke/Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples in the Montreal community. So we just always want to invite people to wherever you're joining us from in the world or listening from, to just take a moment to consider the lands that you're on and the people who have inhabited those lands for a long time and the connections you have to them. And so with that, I will now introduce our guest. So Mary Hale is a professor of religious studies at St. Mary's University. She was one of my professors when I did my undergrad in religious studies there. She's amazing. She taught a course called Love. We'll say Mary's teaching area and research area is eclectic and interdisciplinary. Her prevailing themes are how religion is conceived of, performed, and received in the public sphere. And her most recent work looks at mindfulness curriculum in public and private schools. She teaches in the areas of new religious movements, religion and ecology, religion and social movements, death, and of course, love. And I have also taken the death course. And religion and ecology. Basically, I'm just a super fan of Mary, and I'm very excited that she's here today. So I asked her, since it's around the time of Valentine's Day, it's the month of February, on a lot of people's minds is love as a general theme. And I thought it would be really great to chat with Mary, because when I took this course on love, it really made me think about it in a different way. We usually think about romance when we think about love, but there are so many kinds of love, and there's also a million different ways to think of it, to research it, and to even experience it. And so, yeah, so I thought a good start off question would just be to ask Mary. I'm always curious of the story behind what people do. So I'm curious to ask Mary why she started teaching this course on love.
Thanks, Ashley. And thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, okay. I'm on my son's things. I don't usually use them, but I thought it would be more professional. I'd also like to preface my remarks, though, by acknowledging also that St. Mary's University is on the unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq people. So why did I start teaching love? So there's a short answer to that, because the chair of the department asked me to, and I was adjunct, and so sure, you'll give me a job. I like jobs, but I kept teaching it because there's always something new to learn. Love is such a foundational component, right, of being human, but the definitions of it are really ephemeral. And I love courses that allow students to breathe, to do what I think is what university is for, is to gain new ways to answer existential questions and to really explore who and what they are in the world. So, yeah.
And what do you love about teaching love?
Oh man. I'd say the first thing is that I actually don't feel like I teach it. Um, it always feels like I'm introducing students and myself to a whole bunch of different conceptions of love, and inviting conversations, right? So I would say the best part of facilitating the course is the different perspectives that everybody brings to the course, and watching how all of us get to be transformed by that encounter. The other thing is that I realized it was it was a really unique opportunity to engage students from all disciplines because it's a course that pulls from everywhere in the university, and invite them to think beyond their major courses of study. And like I said before, to kind of consider who and what they wish to be in the world. Um, because really, in all its guises, love is about relationships, and we're communal creatures. Right?
Ellie, you have questions?
Can we ask questions? Is that how we roll today?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm cool with that.
Great. So Mary, I'm totally curious, what do you actually teach? I mean, that sounds funny, but like, is it, definitions of love by philosophers, or is it like, what's actually on the curriculum?
That's a really great, yeah, that's a really great question, Ellie. It changes every time I teach it, because there's always some kind of new, there's always some kind of new research out there. It's now a 1,000 level course, and so one of the fundamental things about it is that we use it to introduce the idea of what religious studies is, and also introduce different traditions and worldviews. So there's always a component of that in the course. The last time I taught it, I did it thematically and then plugged in different types of religious worldviews to those themes. So we talked about unconditional love, we talked about romantic love, talked about friendship. I have done it philosophically. One time I did philosophy, religion, and science, because in the early 2000s, science was a big part of love research. Helen Fisher, who's an anthropologist, was looking at using MRIs to talk about romantic love. Actually, she does a really interesting TED Talk. I'll send Ashley the link, and she can pass it around if you like. Yeah, so the answer is it changes.
And I'm super interested. So when I took the course, and it sounds like it changes a lot, and there are a lot of different kinds of love. So is there an area of love that has piqued your interest the most over the years? Has it changed? And why is that, why is that type of love so interesting to you?
Yeah, the longer I teach it, the more I realize that all the types of love, and I'm just going to express it in like Augustinian terms right now, but myriad cultures make these distinctions. There's eros, romantic love, agape, unconditional love, and philos, brotherly love or friendship love. But I realized really that they are all intertwined, and I think Adnan touched upon that in his discussion of Sufism. But there are a couple of things that actually do stand out to me. I just dig this, the Jewish concept of loving as if. Your feelings don't matter. Who cares about how you feel? You act as if, so if you're not loving God right now, that's fine, but you still have to adhere to whatever precepts of Torah you have agreed to adhere to. And so like I always use this example with my students. So I love my husband very much, but we've been together for 25 years. Well, we've been married for 25 years, together for longer than that. And what you wear on each other. My husband hates to put away his boots. He always leaves them in the doorway, and I trip over them every single time I come home. And this was just like a recurring theme for years. I come home after everybody was in bed because I had a late meeting or something, and I trip over his boots. And so one time I just had it. It was a nasty day, and it was slushy, and it was wet, and I came in and I fell on my proverbial when I got home, and I was wet and cold and damp, And all I wanted to do was take the boots and scoop up some of the slush and go up to him in bed and just dump them all over him. I was very excited about that. Dump them all over him. But I didn't. Because I mean, first of all, I would have had to wash the sheets. But really, I didn't, because I realized in that moment, it was one of those turning points that I needed to act as if I actually loved my husband, because I didn't. I was mad. So I acted as if. I moved the boots and I went upstairs and I got ready for bed, and I didn't say boo about the boots. I just kissed him goodnight and rolled over and went to sleep. And in the morning, things were fine. And I felt a lot better about the fact I'd done that. I acted as if. I don't always, but when I do, I feel better. So I like that. And I also like the concept of unconditional love. And I think the two kind of really go together. You know, let's just act as if I love you unconditionally. One does that with toddlers, right? You know, when they're screaming and they won't stop. I know, I'm going to act as if I love you unconditionally. I like it though, because it's complex and it's complicated. Because what does it mean, right? Can you actually do it? If you get pleasure, does that mean that it's unconditional? Can you be selfless? They're unanswerable questions, but I think that I think they're important ones, and it's actually the process of trying to answer them that helps us to understand more what it means to love. Does that give you enough to chew on?
Yeah. So many more, like just taking a moment to think about all of that. But yeah, I remember a story that you had read to us. I think it might have been my first class, where this man who was in the subway in New York was waiting for the subway, and another man started having a seizure and he fell onto the tracks. And this man, without a second thought, who had just been standing there watching, dove over this other guy in the tracks and like laid on top of him as the subway car came and, like, you know, basically rolled over both of them, and they both survived. He was barely injured, and you know, when the reporters afterwards asked him, why would you do that, he just said, I don't know, it just was the right thing to do. I just did it. I didn't think. And one of the best questions that I still don't have an answer for, you know, and there's, I think, different theories on it, but you know, why would a human do that for someone that they don't know in this totally, you know, everybody thinks of New York as such a like individualistic place, and there's, you know, all these people are just doing their own thing. It's a big city. And so especially in an environment like that where everybody is, you know, rushing their own thing, like what drives a person to do that, you know? Like,
yeah, that story still moves me, and I don't know about you, but I find it really humbling, because I honestly don't know if I would do that. You know, we all like to think that we would, you know, but yeah, I don't know. And I think that's one of the other things I really enjoy about teaching love, is that, well, it's like teaching religion in general, right? There are no answers. There's just really important questions to explore together.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? Or I guess there is a question here. So first of all, I'm new to graduate studies, so I don't have like language for everything. You know, like people who are in academia, they have words. This is something I'm really excited about going to school, is I'm going to learn the words. So if I don't have quite all the right words, just, you know,
don't worry about it.
Yeah. So somebody whose work I really admired for years is Krista Tippett with the On Being Project in the United States. And she has talked for years about love, and she uses these terms like, I can't remember, something about like love being able to be robust in a way that we don't usually think of love. And she's thinking of love as an actual force that can change relationships to society. I like, this is what I feel her work is going for, like that love can actually change things if we think of it as robust enough, not just kind of like this idea, this feel good, like, and she has language around this that I'm like, it's escaping me now. And I was thought about pulling out my book of hers to try to find it, but I can't remember all these terms that she uses. But I guess my question for you here is like, do you have maybe, I don't know if it's hope or optimism or ideas, just from being somebody who researches this and who has been reading lots, do you have hope and a belief that love can actually like transform things on this big level where we're
So Renee is frozen.
Oh,
Everybody's
sorry.
frozen.
Can you
Can
hear
you
me?
guys hear me?
No, I can't.
I can hear you, Mary, but you appear to be frozen
Yeah.
to me.
Mary's frozen to me. Okay. So I
The
can,
weather. It's the cold breeze outside. We're all frozen.
Hopefully she'll come back in a sec.
She'll come back. Oh, there she is. Mary, you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that.
okay. So
All right.
I'll finish my wrap up here what I'm trying to say. So I was wondering if how maybe optimistic you feel, or even evidence that you see of love being this transformational power, not just science and technology and like the things that we usually think of as the tools, like that we can actually wrap our hands around and like get involved, like that are somehow more tangible. Like, what are your thoughts about that? And if you get where if you can kind of understand what I'm asking.
I think I do, Renee. So I'll address it, and please, other people feel free to jump in as well. I think that to start out with, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about this concept in Judaism about acting as if that feelings aren't the issue, because there was a kids album came out in the 70s, Free to Be You and Me. And there's this little song that goes, feelings are such real things. They change and change and change. And so and this is the idea in Judaism. It's like, look, your feelings are going to change, man, but your actions. So a lot of people talk about love as being a verb. You know, it as being something that you do. It's not something that you feel. Madeleine L'Engle also talks about this in some of her YA fiction, that so that actually does give me hope. I'm a naturally optimistic person, and I grew up in the 70s as like a Protestant United Churchy sort of person, so I tend to be a little, oh, let's all love and hug everybody. So trying to restrain myself from that, to say that I'm a hopeful person, and I really believe in the capacity of human beings to overcome their propensity to be unkind. I think that people are inherently good. There are a lot of people who do a lot of terrible things. There's no two ways about it, and I don't want to at all gloss over that. But I think that our capacity for love, to act in a loving way, you know, to act as if, is one of our species' strengths. So yeah, I mean, I think that's about as, I think it's about as concrete as I can get. What do the rest of you think about that? It's such a great question.
Well, I liked how you brought it back to that as if, because we can act contrary to our feelings. We don't, it doesn't have to be like like in terms of other species, I don't know a lot about other species, to be quite honest. So I don't know if they can act contrary to instinct or contrary to like an impulse, but we can. So we can make other choices than the easy one, or maybe the selfish one, or whatever, that would have an unloving result.
That's one of the reasons I really like to teach love, because I feel like in some small way, if I can get people to think about their capacity for that, that they'll, go out into the world as better people. I mean, not that they were horrible people to begin with, but being more mindful of what their values are and their ability to live out those values. I did well, I want to talk about this just a little later, but I'll just drop it in right now and kind of let people think about it. My favorite assignment ever that I did, that my classes did, was I challenged my love students to live a day loving unconditionally. It was one of those things you just think, oh, this would be really neat. I wonder what'll happen. Oh my gosh. People still, I still get letters every once in a while, or emails. Wow, remember that assignment? I was thinking about that the other day. It really changed how I think about things. I mean, not everybody, obviously, but it was a powerful, powerful assignment. And it really astonished me. At the creativity and the ability of my students to find ways to be that in the world.
Are you able to share any examples?
Yeah, so there are a couple actually, and they're kind of small, but they were it was how it moved the students that made it so powerful. So one example, there was a student who lived in one of those small apartment buildings. There were probably like eight or 10 apartments. He rallied everybody around, and they had their homeless person. There's a homeless guy who slept in their vestibule, and that was kind of like his place. And he had a small dog as well, and a little bit and a shopping cart, right? So this student rallied everybody together, and they got a couple of Rubbermaid totes. He said, I even went down and measured the shopping cart to make sure that it would fit. And they filled one of the totes with just dog stuff, food and a couple of toys, and I think they got a couple of leashes, just stuff like that. And then the other one, they just left empty, so he had something to put his stuff in. And they worked out a rota. I mean, it made everybody feel so good that they worked out a rota. So every couple of weeks they'd check in with the guy and say, so what can we do? Are you out of dog food? Do you need socks? That sort of thing. But that came spontaneously from the rest of his neighbors. It wasn't just him. And he was so full of joy. At the end of the term, he came to me and said, we're still doing it. This is so great. And now, look, I know that there are some systemic issues here and everything. And we could talk about that, but just the fact that just a small thing kind of snowballed and ended up being a consistent thing. And the other one was very tiny. One of the young women was just trying to think, how in the world am I going to do this? I have no idea how to do this. She had an appointment. She parked. She put money in the meter, and there's this woman who had a Timmy's cup, asking for change. And she said, look, I don't have any change, but I'd be happy, and she gave her breakfast, essentially. I went off to her appointment. She comes back down, and there's one of the meter guys, giving people tickets and stuff. And she's like, oh no, I didn't have any change. And just as she gets there, this woman that she gave her breakfast to was taking money out of her Timmy's cup and putting money in the meter for her. And she was in tears when she told me about it. She was like, she didn't have anything. And she put loonies in my, and I hear from her every now and then, actually. Just, just drops me a line and says how she's doing. And she almost always brings that up. So yeah, just little things, but it was really, it was so heartening to see how people took that, where they took it, and how it made them think differently.
When you talk, it really makes me think that we're capable of a lot more love than we give ourselves credit. And it often starts with small things. So I think human capacity, I'm also the eternal optimist. So the human capacity for love is actually great. And I think it's sometimes the lens. And I've sort of, as you were talking, thought about two lenses that we see. And one of them is the lens through which news comes, which is always the bad stuff. I mean, what's newsworthy is, what's not happening or what's not good, and every so often we get a good news story sort of tagged on the end or something, or here's on this whole webpage of 1 million stories, here in the bottom corner is the good news corner. So that lens of what stories we tell. We've talked about that before in other contexts. And the other thing that's come to mind, and I'm wondering if you could comment on that, especially around Valentine's Day, is that we've really reduced love to romantic love. And I mean, we in the MFSC see that a lot, that as we approach Valentine's Day, a lot of people are really depressed. And most of the people who talk to us about Valentine's Day are the ones who are single, because they think that love is all about having an intimate relationship and having very high expectations about that. What that means, and even, and if they're not in a relationship, or if they're in one, it's not a great one, or there's something wrong with it or whatever. And so our sort of the way we have limited love just to mean one-on-one couplehood, whereas there's so much more. So I'm just wondering, I don't know, these are just my thoughts. If I'd love to hear your comments on any of those.
Yeah, I actually, thank you, Ellie. I've been thinking about that a lot, actually. I've been reading a lot of Brene Brown, who's a sociologist, who works a lot in the area of shame, and resilience. And I think that it's easy to reduce. It's easier if we reduce it, right? And it really buys into a neoliberal narrative of scarcity, and scarcity versus abundance. And so trying to reverse that narrative without losing our capacity to be critical, because like I said, you can't still, everybody's fine, we'll just love each other, blah, blah. That's not the answer. Love is hard. And when we reduce love like that to just romance, and have this narrative of saying if you're not coupled, or if you're not tripled, or wherever your fancies lie, then you're nothing, right? That kind of harkens back to this thing of scarcity and of shame. That love is scarce, and the only type of love that matters is love that's going to put me in a romantic relationship. And it's interesting that you talked about intimacy, because love is intimate. Loving yourself is intimate, right? And I don't mean that on a puerile level. I'm like, learning how to do that is really difficult, because most of us don't really take the time to make friends with ourselves, right? So we see the only kind of intimacy that we can get is from another individual. I think changing that mindset in that narrative is really important. So I have great admiration for journalists, for instance, who can be critical and balanced in their approach. So seeing the good and the bad. I think now some things are just bad. Let's be very clear. I'm not going to expect a reporter to talk about domestic abuse and say, oh, well, the good side, because there's not, right? So it's not a good side. But when, for instance, talking about climate change, saying it's actually hugely important to balance those stories of disaster with stories of hope, because all the research has shown that people just shut right down. I don't know. I feel like I'm wandering away from the question, because it's a good one. But
I could personally listen all day, and I have 10,000 more questions just from that one bit. But I'm really curious, sort of on that topic, or which topic it's shifted. But really, when you were speaking, I started thinking about how in the past 5 to 10 years, especially, social media has come to play a bigger role in our lives. And so now not only do we have the image that the media sells us about romance and love and movies and TV, but now we see love portrayed on Instagram and Facebook and other areas. And so I'm curious in sort of about two things. And one is if your students talk about those sorts of things in relation to love, or if the conversation has shifted because of how big a role social media plays in our lives, and if there's been any sort of interesting research that you've uncovered about love and sort of shifts in that as our culture itself shifts.
It's a little difficult to answer, just because I haven't taught love in about a year, or a year and a half actually. And before that, there was some research on social media, but I didn't spend a lot of time researching it because I wanted to move away from those conversations. Certainly the anecdotal stuff that I get from students, or got from students then, and I get from my own offspring, who are in their early 20s, and I have twins who are teenagers. They're always highly critical of what is being portrayed, but I don't find that a lot of critical questions are being answered. So they'll be critical of this message, but how that criticism is being applied is not so apparent to me. They'll say oh, that's just so wrong. People should love who they want to love, or and they should, but it doesn't really seem to go beyond that. So I think in some ways, what social media perpetuates is a tendency to shallowness, and to not asking critical questions. So I annoy the hell out of my children by saying, oh, really? Huh, why do you say that? What's so annoying about that? Why? Just so they have that voice in their head when they go out into the wider world. My 22-year-old calls me every once in a while. She's like, there's your voice in my head. I just want to watch the video. And I'm like, well, no, you can't. You have to think about it, man. Because that's part of your privilege. So you just, you sit back and you be critical and change the world. Yeah, so that's what I have to say about that. I'd be really interested to hear what other people are thinking about that, like the portrayal of love in social media as well.
I might have a bit of a deviation. I'm interested by this sort of interplay between, oh wait, camera turned off again. The interplay between romantic, friendship, and also purpose, like your job per se. And might be a bit controversial, but the most recent Toy Story movie really dealt with this issue quite effectively. I totally wrote it off. I thought I was just going to go see a bad conclusion to the saga I've been following since 1996, but I can attest it was a real hard hitter. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I will not spoil it, but I'm wondering if you might have some, either from separate traditions, but if there's much insight between those sort of three, in the movie, there's a lot of interplay between loving one's work, or what one has made their calling, love of one's friends and the people that accompany you doing that, and then romantic love. I won't say what happens at the end, but do different traditions sort of, especially in our sort of like social media age, is there a lot of discussion of like love of work? Do traditions disagree on that? And then like, how does your romantic love and your friends' love play in? It's a bit of a large question from Toy Story, but
yeah, no, it's a great question, and I have to admit I haven't seen it yet because I just got burned out, and then my kids are like, no, that's the best one, man, you have to watch it. So maybe I'll watch it now. So what I just want to make sure that I'm addressing what you were actually asking, Mark, if that's okay.
Yeah,
so
of course.
So what I'm hearing is that you're interested in ways in which different religious worldviews talk about essentially what we call like work-life balance, like balance between, So so Judaism is really cool. In Maimonides, actually has in Guide to the Perplexed, I think it's Guide to the Perplexed, actually it spells it out. But this is what you do here, and this is what you do here, and this is what you do here. I think Judaism's been around a long time, right? And so there are there's specifics for when you should be with your wife. There's specifics, and depending on what your profession is. So there's a real sense of you have to balance it all. This is the time for friends. This is the time for romantic love. This is the time for loving your work. Other traditions are less prescriptive-ish. And a lot of traditions that are holistic, like indigenous worldviews, or we could talk a little bit about different facets of Hinduisms as well, where there's no bifurcation. There's no distinguishing between religion or secular, or this love or that love. The idea is that there's a way to encounter and be in relationship, and all of those loves are intertwined. Christianity, of course, will say, well, back in the day, would say, look, if you want to spend all your time loving God, you're just going to have to, go to a monastery or become a priest. Well, and in Buddhism and in some iterations of Hinduism also, we see that. There's this sense that you can't live in the world and have this all-encompassing love of God, which again, and Adnan touched upon that in his last one. So I guess the answer really, Mark, would be it's complicated. Does that address your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I guess to leave a tail, part of it is where one places their devotion. That's the hard-hitting bit in the movie, and where I may or may not have been very sad, but it's very good. Anyways, thanks for the answer.
Sure. But that's a tough one, right? Where are you going to love the most? But again, you know what? That buys into a trope that says that we can't love wholeheartedly in every way. And I don't know if that actually is people's experiences. Look, I love what I do. I really do. It's so much fun. I love doing this. I love teaching. I love my research, probably with all my heart, but I also love my kids with all my heart. And most of the time I love my parents, not my parents. Well, yeah, them too. But most of the time I love my partner with all my heart, except when he leaves his boots around. So I think that it's important to be mindful of the underlying narratives, and this is something that I find really interesting. You know, what are the what's beneath the surface here? What is driving that narrative that says that we have to make a choice? I mean, you have to make a time choice, of course, but I would argue that in making a time choice, that's not actually a measure of how much you love one thing over another. That's a measure of how much you love yourself, you know, and want that reflected in different facets of your life. Like I could stay down here in the basement and research 12 or 13 hours and never go upstairs and see my kids and make them do their chores and cook dinner and, you know, play a rousing game of Sorry or something. But I choose not to, not because I don't love my work, but because I love myself enough to give myself a little variety. Does that make sense?
I would add to that the lines between work and family can be blurry, or, you know, like in Christianity, it's love the Lord your God, you know, but love your neighbor as yourself. And it's and where do they meld? And I think other religions would have, you know, similar quotes that would sort of say the same thing. But for me, loving others is a way to show my love for God, or loving myself. I can only do that. I need to do that so that I can love others better. And so I guess in some way we need to differentiate in terms of time, but philosophically or theologically, for me, I wonder if there's actually a difference, if it's not all love for life in a way, is if that's not the goal.
I think it's very Western to try and divide everything up. I mean, many cultures do. It's not just in the West, but they divide it up in order to talk about it, but not necessarily in order to live it.
Yeah.
And that's where I'd have some arguments with Augustine, but I have so many arguments with Augustine that we really should not even go there.
I have a question. I don't know if anybody asked this, but I just thought about it. What are your thoughts on, because I've heard people in some relationships say like you can't choose who you fall in love with, or who you love. So I guess like what are your thoughts on that? Like,
okay, so I have that's a great question. I have very strong opinions about this, and they're just mine. Okay. But yes, you can choose. You could choose. Like this is actually some wisdom I got from my mom. She said, "Look, Mary, I have been propositioned many times. Nobody ever wants their mother to say that to them." And she said, "But I chose your dad." She said, "So don't let anybody tell you that there's only one person out there for you. But when you make your choice, and look, if it's a smart choice, you know, you're not being abused. It's a healthy relationship. I mean, let's just say that's the context. You have a choice. You know, you don't. You can see I have a very strong opinion about this, but when I teach Judaism, when I teach Islam, when I teach about cultures for where and Hinduism's, when I teach about cultures where arranged marriages are the norm, that's how human beings have been hooking up for thousands of years. Look, it's not always awesome and wonderful. We all know this, but there is an element of understanding in that it is a choice. That's you know, the act as if thing. Now, look, sometimes it doesn't. You know, often it doesn't work, and sometimes people aren't super happy, and that's nothing to be discounted. But in my experience and in my opinion, the longer I research this and the more broadly I research love, I really do come down on the side that it is a choice. It doesn't mean that you have to decide that because you have made this particular choice that you have to stick with it for the long run, but don't blame it on love. You know, I go to work, I have a colleague who's awesome. This is hypothetical. I go to work, I have a colleague. Well, I do have awesome colleagues, but nobody I'm interested in hooking up with. But just we spend a lot of time together. We hang out. We really enjoy each other's company. Very attractive. They find me attractive. I have a choice. I can go out for drinks, or I can come home and trip over the booze. You know. So does that mean that my feelings aren't strong? No, of course not. We've all been in love or felt really strong feelings for other people. They're really compelling, and when somebody gets in your head, it's hard to get them out. But again, you know, you do have a choice. That seems to be what the research says, and that is again what my experience is. It's not like a soap opera, right? Or a romance novel. But again, it doesn't mean you have to stay with the person you've chosen.
Can I add something? Because I hear something else in that question.
I just want to be really clear about that. I'm at an age where I have tons of friends who are divorced, you know, and they're choices for themselves. But I will tell you that the ones who seem the most happy are not the ones who have claimed that they just fell in love with someone else and they couldn't help it. Most of those relationships actually are not around anymore. The ones who are most happy are the ones who said, you know what, this made me realize I am unhappy, and I need to move on. Does that make sense, Lori?
I was about to ask another question, but yeah, I guess I just wanted to actually, I don't know if I'm going to be clear because it's not clear in my mind, so it's going to be maybe all over the place, but sure. Don't you think that the structural organization we live in, like to consider a certain couple, or like friendships a certain way, don't you think that it's really restraining, and that actually we're not listening to our hearts, and that the culture we live in is not necessarily what it should be? Like, is there a way it should be, kind of thing? I don't know if I'm clear. And since you like studied like religions, and I want to know what you think about that.
Right. So you need to understand that I grew up in LA in the late 70s and the 80s. I have a very broad sense of what's okay. And I also parent 2 queer children. So my sense of what is what society should condone, or how society should be structured, is admittedly a little different than what others. So I would say to you, yes, I think that our society is predicated on heteronormativity, and also is not necessarily open to polyamory. You know, having more than one partner. If you are in a polyamorous relationship, it's very, very difficult to negotiate that structurally, systemically, legally in our culture. Robert Heinlein, who's a science fiction author of the old school, did a lot of writing about different types of marriages and families and such, that we're only now beginning to really see lived, right? I mean, I think things are changing, but I don't think they're changing fast enough for the people who would prefer, say, to be polyamorous rather than monogamous. And a lot of that has to do with Western legal systems. And actually, you know what? It all comes down to property laws, doesn't it? It's all about property, right? And inheritance. My husband's a lawyer. We spend a lot of time talking about this stuff. That's a great question, though, Lori. What do you think?
Of my question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, I don't know, I'm studying right now. I have 2 courses on Indigenous people study, like kind of studies, and I have a course in British Columbia right now, and yeah, it's all about the system. Like it's just made to like, yeah, I'm sure you all know, like it's just to prioritize some people and like to benefit some peoples, and like the other ones are just like, well, just suffer kind of thing. And like in the structural like wedding part, I didn't research anything. I was just like wondering what, when you were talking, that like it's really interesting that like we kind of agree upon that, like, okay, there are some things in our society that we don't agree with, but this is just like, okay, like we're gonna get married at that age and we're gonna have kids and that's it. Like, and I feel like it's not talked about enough in our society.
So it's more comfortable, isn't it, to if you are fairly comfortable with the norms, and if you don't spend a lot of time questioning them, it's easy. Look, I guess I'm kind of a product of that. So I have to say that when we immigrated to Canada, we were in Ottawa for a short time, but then we lived in Quebec, and I was stunned at how many people weren't married. Like, shocked. Because in the US, at least in that time, you did not do that. Oh my gosh. No. But in Quebec, especially, it seemed much more conducive to a person's happiness not to get married, which is fine. I don't have an issue with that, but it was weird. It was kind of real culture shock. So I think that the society's changed very, very, very slowly. And every culture actually does set up their family structure in a way that makes sense to their context, right? And it's problematic no matter where you go, because human beings are not all alike, right? We're very fluid and fickle, and so one particular system that may have worked a couple of 100 years ago doesn't necessarily work now, but it's very hard to make those shifts when family structure is so intertwined with legal structure. Yeah.
Thank you, Annette.
Thank you. That was a great question.
I just want to say that it's a couple minutes after 3, and so everybody's welcome to stay on for a few more minutes and talk, but it might be a good time to kind of wrap up. And if anyone needs to go, whether it's for class or you have another meeting or whatever, that's also okay. But I feel like I could sit here and chat about love all day, so just see if anybody has sort of any final maybe questions for Mary, or comments or thoughts on today, like whatever's in your head, go for it.
I'm still on that question of choice. And I think I agree on one hand, we can certainly choose. I think more often than not, we choose not to love because we're told, and certainly you're free to love. I think it's also I see that a lot on queer positive, social media as an affirmation of diversity. But I also, if we sort of say I can choose, I also want sort of the other side, or another side of that to me is that to always leave myself open to the possibility that there's love out there and I might be surprised by it. And again, that's maybe more of a philosophical, theological, spiritual statement that I never know where I find love and I might be totally blown away. Like the stories you've told actually of this, I'll tell you another story. My partner went out yesterday to go to Starbucks for the first time in months. And when she got to the window, the drive-through, the guy said, "Oh, the person ahead of you paid for your order." And she's like, "Oh my gosh!" And the guy said, "No pressure at all, but if you want to do the same, you're welcome to. And she did, and who knows how long that went on. And the neat thing is nobody could thank anyone because the cars was a drive-through, so they went and off they were. But she was on cloud nine when she came home, and it was just this little bit of love that was shown to her, and she was totally surprised by that. She says, I've always heard of this, but I've never actually experienced it. It was so cool. And she posted on Facebook about it, so I can tell the story. But that surprise, you know, like we can choose, and sometimes we choose not to for all sorts of reasons. It's not the right time, or it's not the right person, or but I can't. I couldn't be. My parents couldn't handle if I came out to them, or whatever. But sometimes we just need to be open to that possibility that we're just blown away and surprised, and it's awesome.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Ellie. I think that's a really important point. And it's one thing that I actually didn't touch upon that I actually really should have, is that when we're talking about choices, I recognize that I'm coming at this from a position of privilege, right? Some people don't have choices, right? You know, they don't have choices to leave, right? Or they don't have choices to pick between person A or person B, right? But I think one of the points that you've raised, those that a couple of things. First of all, just little actions like that serve to kind of remind us that that kindness goes a long way. And I'm always saying, you know, kindness costs you nothing. Well, sometimes it does, actually. Sometimes it costs you a coffee, but sometimes it costs you other things, right? It can cost you a lot. But in our day-to-day lives, really choosing to be kind, choosing to let somebody cut in front of you instead of honking your horn and flipping them off, you know, yeah, right. Those little choices, I think, really do, they really do add up. And the meanness that comes from, and I don't mean mean just as in unkind, but I mean mean also as in small, that comes from constantly choosing not to put ourselves out there, not to, I'm channeling Brene Brown again, but not to take advantage of those little moments. I think those add up too. And I think those also are a reflection of a neoliberal narrative of scarcity. If we can do small kind things, we actually can make differences in people's lives. And I really do think that adds up to something that's bigger than the sum of our parts, to coin a cliche. I don't even know if you can coin a cliche, to repeat a cliche. The English teacher in me is screaming right now.
Just the last question before we go. If you had one book to recommend us about love, what would it be?
Wow, that's a great question, Laurie. Whoa, gosh, because everybody would get something out of something.
Okay, maybe two then.
No, you know what? So I'm gonna say there's a book by Jean Vanier, and I know that some of the actions that he did come to light have really disillusioned a lot of people, and I'm very sad about how he used his power. Fortunately, you can get it for free, and I can't remember the title because you've asked me. But Jean Vanier does this beautiful job about talking about meeting one another where each person is, and it's quite beautiful.
Is that
That's the
from?
only book I can think of, actually. 'Cause, I don't usually. Oh, I know. Oh, The Art of Loving by Eric Fromm. Yeah, The Art of Living. Okay, so parts of it are super boring and some of it is dated, but he he is the foundation on which Oprah is built. All of the things that she has talked about in terms of relationships and love, Eric Fromm. Yeah. Yeah. ERICH. Thank you, Ashley.
I can
Thank
second
you.
that that's a great book.
Yeah, it is a great book. It's parts of it are kind of boring, but it's actually also quite radical. And he was such an interesting person and came to light at a time when Freud and Marx were just kind of really entering the zeitgeist. He's quite interesting. Yeah. My students usually really love him. Now I want to go back and read him. It's been a while. Thanks, Lori.
Hopefully we all have some time, since things are probably still pretty virtual for most of us. So yeah, I think that's a good place to end for now. And so I just want to say thank you so much, Mary, for joining us today and having this amazing conversation and giving us a lot of stuff to think about. And I hope this was a valuable experience for you as well.
Oh yeah, it was amazing.
Hands.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
And
thanks.
just
thanks for your questions and stuff.
Yeah. And just before we go, I'll mention next week's cafe. So next week we are going to be joined by Lucas Mesquita, who used to work in the International Students Office at Concordia and is also an alumni of Concordia himself. He grew up in Brazil, then moved to Montreal for school, and then has just come back from a year of living in Nepal. And he's going to talk about how his worldview has changed from living on 3 different continents, and the perspective that he's gained and the questions that he has about the world. And I think it's also going to be a really great chat. So hopefully you guys can join us. And next week, particularly for like one time only, we're shifting the time for him. So it's going to be at 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. instead of 2 to 3. So just make note of that if you're going to come, that we did adjust the time. So yeah, so thank you, Ellie. I don't know if you want to stop the recording there. And yeah, thanks for coming, everybody.